Commander Ralvik gripped the edges of the control panel, his knuckles white. The bridge of the Vindicator, the last flagship of the Galactic Alliance, was filled with the sounds of alarms and panicked voices. The enemy fleet was closing in. There was nowhere left to run. Shields at 7%. A crew member shouted. Weapons offline, another reported. Ralvik stared at the massive view screen. The enemy warships, sleek and deadly, moved in a perfect formation, their cannons glowing with lethal energy. The Zarkari Dominion had won. Their leader, High Warlord Drex, had promised total annihilation, and now he was about to fulfill that promise. The Galactic Alliance had fought bravely, but they had been outmatched from the start. Every fleet had fallen, every stronghold had burned. Now, here in the last remaining sector, the Alliance's final defenders faced their doom. A cold voice crackled through the communication channel. Commander Ralvik, said Warlord Drex, surrender. Your fleet is broken. Your world is already in flames. You will not survive. Ralvik clenched his teeth. Surrender was not an option. The Zarkari never took prisoners. They only exterminated. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Vesa, turned to him, her eyes filled with desperation. Sir, if we fight, we die. If we run, we die. There's no way out. Ralvik exhaled slowly. He knew she was right. Every logical thought told him this was the end, but something deep inside him refused to accept it. The enemy ships began their final approach. Their cannons locked onto the Vindicator. Ralvik could already see the glow of their weapons charging. This is it, whispered Vesa. Then, the alarms blared again, but this time, it wasn't a warning of destruction. It was something else. Commander, shouted the sensor officer. Massive energy signatures detected. Something is arriving at the edge of the system. Ralvik's heart pounded. Reinforcements. Impossible. There were no Alliance fleets left. No one was coming to save them. Show me, he ordered. The view screen shifted to the outer edges of the battlefield. For a moment, there was only darkness, the vast emptiness of space. Then, shadows appeared. Massive shadows. One by one, the shapes emerge, breaking through the darkness like giants waking from a long slumber. Warships, but not just any warships. These were enormous, their hulls ancient but powerful, covered in heavy armor that reflected the dim light of the distant stars. The bridge fell into stunned silence. The symbols on the warships were unmistakable, the markings of a long-forgotten empire, a species the galaxy had not seen in war for centuries. Humanity. The Zarkari fleet hesitated. For the first time, they did not fire. A deep, commanding voice echoed through every channel, a voice filled with certainty, with power. This battle is not over. Ralvik felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had returned, and the war was about to change. The enemy fleet remained motionless, their once confident formation wavering. For the first time since the war had begun, the Zarkari hesitated. Warlord Drex's command ship loomed at the center of the armada, its crimson hull glowing with the energy of its primed weapons. But even Drex, ruthless and unshaken throughout the entire war, did not give the order to fire. The newcomers were unlike any warships seen in centuries. They were colossal, far larger than any Alliance vessel, their dark hulls lined with thick plating that seemed almost ancient, yet untouched by time. The humans had been gone for generations, their empire vanishing from galactic affairs without explanation. Some thought them extinct. Others believed they had retreated into the void, abandoning the conflicts of the galaxy. But now, here they were, arriving in the final moments of the war. Commander Ralvik barely dared to breathe. His bridge crew stared at the view screen in shock. The insignia on those ships left no doubt. This was the lost fleet of humanity, a force once spoken of only in war records and forgotten legends. But why now? Why return at this exact moment, when the Alliance was on the brink of collapse? A new voice came over the open communication channel. It was deep, firm, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "This battle is not over," the human commander repeated. His tone was calm, but there was something behind it, something that sent a shiver down Ralvik's spine. The Zarkari fleet finally moved, shifting their formation in preparation for battle. Drex's voice snarled over the comms. "This is not your ward, Terran." A short pause followed. Then the human commander responded, his words precise, deliberate. "It is now." Without further warning, the lead human dreadnought fired. A single beam of blue-white energy erupted from its forward cannons, striking the nearest Zarkari warship. There was no explosion, just a moment of silence before the enemy vessel seemed to disintegrate, its entire structure collapsing inward as if reality itself had folded around it. The Zarkari had powerful ships, but whatever weapon the humans had just used was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The silence on the battlefield shattered as the Zarkari broke formation, their ships scrambling to reposition. The humans did not hesitate. The dreadnoughts surged forward, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space with controlled, devastating precision. Another enemy cruiser took a direct hit. Its shields flared brightly for a second before failing entirely, the ship breaking apart as though it had been struck by a god's hammer. Ralvik's breath caught in his throat. He had expected reinforcements, but not this. Not a force capable of tearing through the enemy like they were nothing. On the Zarkari flagship, Warlord Drex slammed his fist against his throne's armrest. "All ships, return fire. Show them who rules this galaxy." The Dominion's fleet obeyed. Hundreds of plasma bolts, torpedoes, and energy beams streaked toward the human warships. The void was alight with the fury of an entire armada. But then something happened that made even Drex's confidence waver. The human dreadnoughts did not evade. They did not raise shields. They simply took the hits. The enemy's firepower slammed into them and did nothing. The hulls of the Terran warships absorbed the impacts as if they were mere raindrops against a mountain. The attacks that had obliterated the Alliance fleet barely left a scorch mark on the human vessels. Ralvik's mind raced. What kind of technology was this? The Alliance had spent years trying to build defenses strong enough to resist Zarkari weapons, yet these Terran ships shrugged them off as if they were toys. Then the human commander spoke again. His voice was unwavering, devoid of fear. "You have made a grave mistake." And with that, the real battle began. The Zarkari fleet was in chaos. For the first time in history, they faced an enemy whose technology surpassed their own in every way. Their weapons, once feared across the galaxy, now felt useless. The massive human dreadnoughts advanced, unstoppable, their dark hulls absorbing every desperate attack thrown at them. Warlord Drex watched in disbelief as another one of his warships was reduced to nothing in a single shot. The blast had not merely destroyed it, it had erased it, leaving behind only empty space where a powerful battleship had once been. The bridge of the Zarkari flagship was silent except for the hum of warning sirens and the panicked beeping of incoming damage reports. Drex's officers, once proud warriors who had slaughtered entire civilizations, now looked shaken. This was not how it was supposed to go. The war was won. The Alliance was crumbling. The Zarkari had already declared victory, and yet these humans, these long-forgotten relics of an old empire, had returned. And with them, the balance of power had shifted in an instant. "Keep firing," Drex growled, his claws digging into his throne's armrest. His voice was filled with rage, but beneath it, there was something else, something unfamiliar. Fear. Across the battlefield, Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of the human flagship, his expression calm as he observed the chaos unfolding before him. The Zarkari were finally learning the truth. The galaxy had been at war with itself for centuries, never realizing that humanity had left for a reason. They had not retreated in weakness. They had left because they had outgrown the petty squabbles of lesser species. And now, they had returned, not as conquerors, but as executioners. "Target the flagship," Voss said, his voice steady. "Aye, Admiral." The massive cannons of the Dreadnought adjusted their aim, locking onto the warlord's command ship. The targeting systems calculated every detail with inhuman precision. The energy cores of the cannons hummed as they built up power, the ship itself vibrating slightly from the sheer force of the weapons preparing to fire. On the Zarkari bridge, Drex's tactical officer turned, his voice shaking. "Sir, the human Dreadnought. It's charging weapons. They have a lock on us." Drex snarled. "Raise all shields. Divert power from secondary systems. I want full defensive capabilities." The shields of the flagship flickered as they absorbed energy from the ship's reactors. The Zarkari had relied on these shields for centuries, confident that nothing in the galaxy could break through them. But even as they activated, Drex had a sinking feeling in his gut. The other ships had tried the same, and they had fallen just as easily. Then the Dreadnought fired. A single, concentrated beam of blue-white energy erupted from its primary cannon, traveling across the battlefield in the blink of an eye. The Zarkari flagship's shields flared bright, absorbing the impact for half a second. Then they shattered. The ship's armor, thick, reinforced plating meant to withstand planetary bombardments, melted like wax under a torch. The entire command deck shook violently, throwing officers to the floor. Explosions erupted across the ship as critical systems failed. Warning lights bathed the bridge in red as emergency sirens blared. Smoke filled the air. The scent of burning metal and ozone stung Drex's nostrils. He clutched the armrests of his throne, his claws digging deep into the metal. His warship, the pride of the Zarkari fleet, was breaking apart. Another blast struck. Then another. The Dreadnoughts did not fire wildly. They did not waste ammunition. Every shot was calculated, precise, designed to cripple, not destroy. The humans did not fight for sport. They fought with purpose. Drex struggled to his feet, snarling in defiance. "I am Warlord Drex. I am the ruler of the Zarkari Dominion. I will not fall to ghosts." But deep down, he knew the truth. The ghosts had returned, and they were real. Admiral Voss watched as the Zarkari flagship struggled to remain intact. He knew Drex was still alive. He had studied the warlord, understood his tactics, his arrogance, but this was no longer a battle of strategy. It was a reckoning. Voss turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel." A moment later, Drex's face appeared on the view screen, smoke billowing behind him. The once proud warlord looked desperate, his fur matted with sweat, his armor scratched and scorched. Voss spoke calmly. "Surrender." Drex bared his fangs. "Never." Voss did not react. "You misunderstand. That was not a request." Drex's eyes flickered with realization. He was outmatched, outgunned, and the humans, they did not bluff. The war was no longer his to win. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered warships. The once mighty Zarkari fleet, feared across the galaxy, had been reduced to scattered debris floating in the void. Fires raged across broken hulls, escape pods drifted aimlessly, and the silence of death hung heavy over the wreckage. The war should have been over. The Zarkari had declared victory. They had crushed the last of the resistance, forced the Galactic Alliance to its knees. And yet, in the span of hours, everything had changed. The arrival of the human Dreadnoughts had turned the tides of war in an instant, shifting the balance of power in a way no one had foreseen. Aboard the human flagship, Admiral Voss stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the battlefield. The Zarkari had underestimated them. They had assumed humanity had vanished from galactic affairs, faded into legend. But humans had never disappeared. They had simply been watching, waiting, preparing for the moment when they would remind the galaxy why their kind had once ruled the stars. "Status report," Voss commanded. His tactical officer responded immediately. "The enemy fleet is in full retreat, sir. Their flagship is heavily damaged but still operational. Warlord Drex has refused to surrender. Voss exhaled slowly. He had expected this. The Zarkari were proud warriors, but their pride had become their downfall. They had relied on their reputation, their strength, their fear tactics, but fear only worked against those who could be frightened. Humanity had never been afraid of war. They had perfected it. "Prepare a boarding team," Voss said. "I want Drex alive." On the crippled Zarkari flagship, Warlord Drex paced across the ruined bridge, his mind racing. The humans were unstoppable. No matter how many warships he threw at them, they tore through his fleet as if it were nothing. Their technology was superior. Their strategy was flawless. Their weapons were unlike anything he had ever seen. He had no chance of victory, but surrender was not an option. An officer limped toward him, his uniform scorched, his breathing labored. "Warlord, the humans. They're launching a boarding party." Drex's claws tightened into fists. He would not be taken like a caged beast. If this was to be his final battle, then he would go down fighting. "Arm every soldier still standing," Drex ordered. "We make our last stand here." The lights flickered. The ship trembled. And then, with a deafening crash, the humans arrived. The hull of the Zarkari flagship groaned under the pressure of the human boarding craft. Explosive charges detonated along the sealed corridors, sending shockwaves through the ship. Smoke and fire spread as armored human soldiers stormed inside, weapons raised, moving with terrifying precision. They were not invaders. They were executioners. Warlord Drex stood in the ruined command chamber, his officers forming a last defensive line. Their plasma rifles hummed as they prepared to fight to the last breath. But deep down, Drex knew the truth. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The humans moved through the corridors like specters of death. They wasted no movement, no ammunition. Each shot found its mark. Each strike shattered defenses. The Zarkari, once feared across the galaxy, fell like weaklings before them. The Dreadnoughts hadn't just won the space battle. They had brought humanity's warriors to the enemy's doorstep. And now the real reckoning had begun. A massive explosion rocked the flagship as human forces breached the command deck. Smoke poured in, alarms blared, and the last of Drex's forces opened fire. But the humans were already prepared. Their armor deflected plasma shots. Their advanced weapons cut through Zarkari defenses with horrifying ease. Drex roared, charging forward with his blade, determined to die in combat. But before he could reach his enemy, something cold and unbreakable wrapped around his throat. A steel grip belonging to a towering human soldier. The warlord gasped as he was lifted off his feet, staring into the visor of a faceless enemy. "Your war is over," the soldier said, voice like steel. Drex struggled, but it was useless. His forces were gone. His flagship was burning. And the humans had won. Drex's breath came in ragged gasps as the human soldier tightened his grip. For the first time in his life, the warlord of the mighty Zarkari felt something he had never known before: fear. The humans were nothing like the Galactic Alliance. They did not plead. They did not negotiate. They conquered. The soldier released him, letting Drex collapse onto the burning floor of his ruined flagship. Around him, his remaining officers lay defeated, either dead or barely clinging to life. The battle was over. The Zarkari fleet, the unstoppable force that had crushed worlds, was no more. Heavy footsteps echoed through the smoke-filled chamber as a new figure entered. Admiral Voss, clad in sleek, unmarked battle armor, approached with measured steps. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with cold fire. "You never should have come for us," Voss said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment. "You thought humanity had vanished, that we had grown weak. But we never disappeared. We were waiting, watching. And now you see the cost of your arrogance." Drex tried to speak, but his throat was raw, his pride shattered. His forces had fallen. His fleet was in ruins, and the terrifying truth loomed over him. This wasn't just a victory for the humans. This was a warning. The Dreadnoughts outside, had not even unleashed their full power. The human fleet had not been tested, only revealed. And yet they had crushed the Zarkari with ease. What would happen if the humans ever decided to wage a true war? You have two choices, Voss continued. Surrender, and your people may yet live. Resist. He gestured to the burning remains of the warship around them. And this will be the fate of your entire empire. Drex stared at the human admiral, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a collapsing star. His empire had mocked the humans. They had dismissed them as relics of the past. But now, standing in the ruins of his own command center, he realized the truth. The real relics were the Zarkari. The old ways of war no longer mattered. Humanity had ushered in a new era, an era where they were the dominant force in the galaxy. And nothing would ever be the same again. Drex knelt on the scorched floor of his ruined flagship, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. The weight of defeat pressed on him like an unmovable force. His empire, his people, his fleet, all of it had been shattered in a single ruthless display of human power. The war had not just been lost, it had been erased, burned away in the fire of human vengeance. The Zarkari had been conquerors for generations, spreading terror across the stars, believing themselves to be the ultimate force in the galaxy. And yet here he was, surrounded by the bodies of his warriors, staring into the cold, unyielding eyes of Admiral Voss. The human admiral had not spoken again, had not demanded anything further. He merely stood there, waiting for Drex to understand what had happened, waiting for the reality to sink in. And it did, like a slow poison spreading through his veins. Drex realized that this moment was not just about him or his fleet. This was the turning point of history. The galaxy would never see the humans the same way again. Outside the shattered viewport, the Zarkari fleet lay in ruins. Fires raged across broken hulls, shattered warships drifted lifelessly in the void, and the once proud banners of the Zarkari dominion floated among the wreckage like funeral shrouds. And beyond them, the human dreadnoughts loomed, their massive forms untouched, their weapons still hot from the devastation they had unleashed. Drex gritted his teeth. He had underestimated them. They all had. The entire galaxy had dismissed humanity as a forgotten relic, a species that had faded into obscurity. But humans had not been idle. They had been preparing, watching, learning, and when the moment came, they had struck with the precision of a hunter culling the weak. You never intended to negotiate. Drex rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Voss finally moved, his expression unreadable. You were never interested in peace. We simply answered you in the only language you understand. Drex let out a bitter laugh, though it was laced with pain. He had thought himself the master of war, the architect of domination. And yet, in the face of humanity's power, he had been nothing more than a footnote in their grand design. What happens now? Drex asked, though he already knew the answer. Voss regarded him for a long moment before speaking. You tell the rest of the galaxy what you've seen here. You tell them that humanity does not forget, that we do not forgive, that when we return to the stars, we do not come as diplomats or traitors. We come as conquerors of those who dare to challenge us. Drex clenched his fists, fury and helplessness warring inside him. And if I refuse? Voss's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes, something ancient and terrifying. Then the Zarkari dominion will be nothing more than another memory lost to time. Your people will not just be defeated. They will be erased. The choice is yours. Drex felt the weight of the moment settle upon his shoulders. He had been prepared to die in this battle, to go down in history as a warlord who fought to the bitter end. But now he saw the truth. The humans had given him something far worse than death. They had given him the burden of survival. The galaxy had long feared the Zarkari. But now, a new terror had emerged from the shadows. A terror that had been watching, waiting, and when the moment was right, had struck with unstoppable force. The humans had returned. and nothing would ever be the same again.